Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to retire early but hold off on claiming Social Security? Many people don't even realize this is an option. In fact, studies show that about 3 in 4 retirees claim their benefits the moment they step away from the workforce. But here's the thing. Just because that's the most common path doesn't mean it's the one for you. It all depends. So let's walk through this. Imagine someone wants to retire at 58. That's a little bit earlier than average, being that the average age of retirement in the US is about 64. But we do tend to see a big wave of retirees anywhere from the age of 61 all the way up to the age of 67. And that makes sense because those ages line up pretty closely with Social Security. And having a guaranteed income stream, well, that's a pretty big incentive to step away from the workforce. Now, I recently received a request to do a video on this exact scenario where somebody retires but doesn't yet claim Social Security. And honestly, I think that's a phenomenal example because quite honestly, so much of the content out there, especially the comment on this channel, is based on somebody retiring and immediately claiming Social Security because that's what we tend to see. That's what most people do. That's what roughly 75% of people do. But it doesn't have to be that way. And before we dive into the example, I want to take a moment to clear up a really common misperception. You do not have to claim Social Security right when you retire. I hear this all the time. If I retire at 60 and wait until 65 to claim Social Security, won't those 5 years show up as zeros in my calculation? And the short answer is no, absolutely not. Your benefit is based on your highest 35 years of earnings, no matter when they happened. So once you retire, it means you're no longer adding to your earnings history, but you're not suddenly stacking up zeros. So now that that's clear, here's where things get interesting. If you retire early and delay claiming Social Security, this can work to your advantage, especially later on in your retirement. Why is that? Because as you delay, you allow your benefit to grow, and that increases your income floor, an income floor that is inflation adjusted for the rest of your life. And a higher Social Security benefit down the road means a lot less pressure on your investments later on in retirement. And for some people, your benefit could increase to the point where you don't even need to touch your investments at all. But of course, this does raise a key challenge of what do you live on from the time you retire until the time you claim Social Security? Well, this is where the concept of a bridge strategy comes into play. Essentially, you're building a pool of money that you could live on in those gap years until Social Security kicks in. So for our first example, let's start with a high income earning couple who wants to do an early retirement and stagger their Social Security benefits. So why are we starting with a higher income earning couple? Well, first of all, this is the couple who's most likely to have the ability to build up a sizable cash buffer that makes an early retirement possible. And also, they're the ones most likely to benefit from having one spouse delay claiming all the way up to the age of 70 and getting that benefit to its maximum amount. But don't worry, right after this example, we're going to do a more modest income earner example, and I think it might surprise you. Let's assume we have 2 earners making about $100,000 a year each. We'll assume they're the same age and that they both retire at the age of 58. For someone making $100,000 a year, their full retirement age benefit, so their benefit at 67, might look like $3,200 a month. If they decide to claim early at 62, that benefit would be closer to $2,200 a month. And if they delayed claiming all the way up to the age of 70, that benefit would be closer to $4,000 a month. For this example, we're going to assume that spouse A claims early at the age of 62 and gets $2,200 a month, or about $26,000 a year. Spouse B is going to delay claiming all the way until the age of 70, at which point they'll get $4,000 a month in Social Security benefits, or $48,000 a year. Our target spending in retirement is $100,000 per year. In today's dollars. For this example, we're going to ignore cost of living adjustments because we want to keep this as clean as possible, and we're going to present everything in today's dollars. Essentially, we have to plan their retirement in phases and have different buckets. We're going to use 3 buckets. Our near-term bucket, which is going to cover ages 58 to 61. This is before there's any Social Security benefits for the household. Then we'll have a midterm bucket, which is going to cover when one spouse is collecting Social Security benefits, and that will be from ages 62 to 69. And then we'll have a long-term bucket when that second spouse decides to claim their benefits, which will cover ages 70 all the way up to the ages of 90. Remember that all figures presented are going to be in today's dollars, and importantly, we're going to assume that we can capture a 4% real rate of return on our mid and our long-term buckets. So bucket number 1 covers the 4-year period where there are no Social Security benefits coming into the household. For this retiree couple, it would be ages 58 to 61. Here, the gap is $400,000 because they want to spend $100,000 a year. This money is going to be held in cash-like accounts, whether that is a money market fund, T-bills, a CD ladder, or very short-term bonds. So why are we putting this in cash-like accounts? Well, honestly, this is money to cover your next 4 years. You want this in a place where that money is easily accessible and very low volatility. Now, in this example, I did assume a 0% rate of return on these funds. However, in real life, I don't want you parking this in a savings account at one of the big banks that is earning next to 0%. Instead, I would say put it somewhere where you can earn market rates. Maybe that is a money market fund, a CD or T-bills. You want to put it somewhere where you're going to earn a competitive rate, but keep this in cash-like investments. As of September 2025, when I'm filming this video, you can still get a guaranteed 4% or 4+% rate of return on cash. One quick note here that pertains to our example: if our couple retires when they're each 58, a lot of their money still might be locked up in retirement accounts. And if you have traditional retirement accounts and you can't access those funds until retirement age, which would be 59 and a half, you need to make sure that you have funds elsewhere that you can access penalty-free. Bucket number 2 in this situation is going to cover the 8 years of spending from ages 62 to 69 once spouse A files for Social Security. At this point, spouse A is 62. They've filed for their Social Security benefit early, receiving about $2,200 a month or $26,400 a year. We are still going to keep our spending the same, $100,000 a year for the household, but now our gap that needs to come from investments shrinks to $73,600. This midterm bucket is going to have more of a balanced mix when it comes to investments. We're going to have some of it in maybe intermediate term bonds as well as equities. And here we're going to assume that we can capture a 4% real rate of return over time. So once this couple reaches the age of 62, in order to fund 8 years of spending with $73,600 from investments, assuming our investments can capture a 4% real rate of return, they would need about $515,000 invested. But here's some good news. We're going to assume that this bucket was funded and ready to go by the time this couple stepped away from the workforce at the age of 58. So that adds 4 more years of compounding. So that means we might have needed even less invested. So assuming a 4% real rate of return at the age of 58, this bucket would have had to have about $441,000 invested. Remember, just because you stopped working doesn't mean your investments have stopped growing. Quite the contrary, your investments should still keep growing in the background no matter what is going on in your life. And finally, bucket number 3 that is going to be used to fund the years from 70 through 90. Now we'll call this our lifetime gap. At the age of 70, spouse B is filing for Social Security. They're receiving $4,000 a month or $48,000 a year. In total, the household will be bringing in $6,200 a month from Social Security or $74,400 a year. So now if we keep our spending at that same level, $100,000, our gap that is needed to be filled by investments falls to just $25,600 for the year. Now, this is a longer term bucket, so my assumption would be that this bucket would have a heavier equities tilt, but it does depend on your risk tolerance. I'm still going to assume a 4% real rate of return just to err on the side of being more conservative. At the age of 70, assuming an annual 4% real rate of return, this bucket would need to be about $374,000 in order to cover about $25,600 of spending. But remember, if our couple retired at 58, this bucket would still have 12 years of compounding before it needs to be at that point at the age of 70. And if we assume a 4% real rate of return, our couple needs an even smaller amount. Discounted back over those 12 years, retiring at the age of 58, this third bucket would need about $233,000 in it. And if the markets cooperate and you earn an even better than 4% real rate of return, this bucket would be even larger and you'd go into your final years of retirement with an even bigger buffer at the age of 70. So ultimately, the total portfolio required to retire today at 58 with these Social Security benefits and have $100,000 in spending, we would need about $400,000 in our first bucket, about $441,000 in our second bucket, and about $233,000 in our third bucket. Total, our couple would need a little bit over $1 million in their portfolio to make this retirement possible. That's not bad at all for an early retirement with conservative withdrawals and conservative growth assumptions, but there are some extra disclosures we need to add here. That 4% after inflation real rate of return is an assumption, not a guarantee. It depends on your asset mix, it depends on your fees, it depends on sequence risk, as well as tax location. Do you have these investments sitting in a Roth, in a traditional account, or in a taxable brokerage? Also, very important to note, this plan is built on spending with purpose, that you are spending your buckets along the way. If we make the assumption that we are actually using our investments to fund our lifestyle, you can get away with significantly smaller buckets. However, if you want a plan that has you not touching your principal, only touching dividends and interest, your plan is going to look very different. Going into retirement, you would need a much larger balance if you never wanted to touch the principal. If we keep all other assumptions identical as we laid out here, this couple would need to go into retirement at the age of 58 with a portfolio of roughly $2.5 million, assuming a 4% yield. So our roughly $1 million portfolio only works if you're comfortable spending down the principal. But if you're not, you're going to need a much larger balance going in if you never want to touch the principal and only spend dividends and interest. Okay, let's move on to a more modest, honestly more typical income earner. Think of someone who's earned around $60,000 a year over the course of their career. Here's what their Social Security could look like by claiming age. If they claimed early at 62, they might be getting $1,600 a month. At full retirement age, 67, it'd be closer to $2,300 a month. If they delayed all the way up until the age of 70, they'd get closer to $2,800 a month. For this example, I'm going to assume our retiree retires at the age of 67, but they don't claim Social Security yet. Instead, they wait until full retirement age at 67, when their benefit would be about $2,300 a month. That's $27,600 a year. For this retiree, we're going to separate their retirement into two buckets. Ages 62 to 66, so before Social Security kicks in, and we're going to assume they want higher spending during this time. These are their go-go years. They're planning on spending $50,000 a year during this period. Then from age 67 through 90, now we're going to assume that they step down their spending to about $40,000 a year. So let's break it down. So that first bucket is going to cover ages 62 through 66, so 5 years of spending, and this is going to be their go-go years. Their target spending during this time is $50,000. Again, we're going to assume a 0% rate of return on their investments. We want to keep this money in cash-like accounts, whether that is a money market fund, laddered CDs, or T-bills. Keep it simple, keep it stable. To fund these 5 years, it's simply $500,000, their annual spending, multiplied by 5. So they would need $250,000 sitting at the ready. Again, because this is near-term money, you want to keep it in cash-like accounts. But just because I'm going conservative for the example and assuming a 0% real rate of return, I don't want you to put this money in an account where you're earning next to nothing. Instead, I still want you to try and capture a market rate. So whether that is putting it in laddered CDs or T-bills or a money market fund, just keep it in a place where it's not going to fluctuate in value. You don't want volatility here. You want this money there so you can spend it when you need it, but you want to capture a competitive market rate. Then let's move on to bucket number 2. And this is going to fund years 67 through 90. And here we're going to assume a slightly slower pace of life. At the age of 67, they finally claim Social Security, at which point they're pulling in $27,600 a year in benefits. They also plan to spend less during this stage of life, about $40,000 a year, instead of our original $50,000. Maybe that's because they already had the honeymoon phase of retirement where they increased their spending. They had some big trips that they got out of the way, and maybe they paid off their mortgage by this point, so maybe their fixed expenses have decreased. Once we factor in Social Security benefits, we have a spending gap of $12,400 a year that needs to come from investments. And again, we're going to assume we can capture a 4% real rate of return. Now we have 2 different ways we can build this bucket. We can approach it from the stance of being willing to spend down the principal, or we can approach it from the stance of not wanting to touch the principal and instead only being willing to spend the interest and the dividends. Let's build both. So option A, being willing to spend down the principal. If you need to pull $12,400 from this portfolio and you can assume you can capture a 4% real rate of return, by the age of 67, you need about $197,000 invested. But if you've pre-funded this bucket by the age of 62 and you simply let it grow for 5 years, assuming a 4% real rate of return, at 62, this bucket would have needed about $162,000 in it. Option B is the 4% rule style, more conservative, preserving our principal method. At 67, you would need about $310,000 in this bucket. But if we discount it back 5 years, pre-funded at the age of 62, assuming a 4% real rate of return, you would need about $255,000 invested. So if you're comfortable spending down that second bucket through age 90, you would need about $412,000 invested at the age of 62. However, if you prefer a more conservative 4% rule style bucket for the later years, plan on retiring with about $505,000 at the age of 62. This is why delaying when you claim Social Security can even work for a typical wage earner. If you have the ability to fund those gap years in retirement and allow your benefit to grow, that can really take your pressure off your investments, but it also gives your investments more time to grow. The exact performance of your investments is going to depend on the market, on cost of living adjustments, on your taxes, but the framework still holds. And if you have any extra income in retirement, like a pension or a little part-time work, those buckets shrink fast. Take our $60,000 earner. Let's say they had a pension that paid $1,000 a month and that started at the age of 62. We'll still assume they delay claiming Social Security until the age of 67. Add in that steady $1,000 a month and the required nest egg drops hundreds of thousands to roughly $195,000 to $198,000 to fund the exact same retirement. That's huge, and that really shows why retirement planning is so individualized, and it truly shows how these small income streams can have a big impact. And one quick note worth mentioning in this video, if you claim Social Security before full retirement age and keep working, Social Security may temporarily withhold some benefits under the earnings test. In 2025, if you're under full retirement age all year, the SSA will withhold $1 for every $2 you earn over $23,400. In the year you reach full retirement age, they will withhold $1 for every $3 earned above $62,160, and they only count earnings before the month you hit full retirement age. After you hit full retirement age, there is no earnings limit. And this limit applies to earned income, so wages or net self-employment. It doesn't apply to pensions, IRA or 401k withdrawals, dividends, interest, or capital gains. So if you retire early and want to pull money from your investment account or your retirement account or receive your pension, just know that's not going to impact your Social Security. Two important clarifications here. You don't lose the money forever. Once you reach full retirement age, if you had earnings withheld because of the earnings test, Social Security will recalculate your benefit and you would then receive a higher monthly amount going forward to account for this. Also, there's a special monthly rule for the first year you retire. Even if your annual earnings are high, you still get your full Social Security check for any months where you are considered retired. This is really handy for people who decide to retire mid or end of year. So what does all this mean? Well, just because you retired doesn't mean you have to claim Social Security. You can claim Social Security whenever it works for you. If you've built bridge buckets and you want your Social Security benefit to increase in the background so you give yourself a higher income floor in retirement, you can absolutely do that. Also, if you have any additional income streams beyond Social Security, that will dramatically reduce the amount you need in your investments to fund the lifestyle you want. And importantly, if you retire early and don't yet claim Social Security, it is not going to add any zeros to your record so long as you already have 35 full years of earnings in your earning history. So what can you do next? Number one, map out your timeline. List out your anticipated spending and income needs year by year. If you're part of a household that is going to have spending needs prior to Social Security kicking in, map out those years. If you're part of a dual income earning household, make sure you map out when spouse 1 claims Social Security and when spouse 2 claims. Number 2, size the buckets. I really like the idea of going into retirement with a pretty sizable cash bucket because I like the idea of not having to worry about market volatility and knowing that that cash is sitting there for whenever you need it. Also, make sure to factor in a real rate of return. Be realistic in your assumptions and what you can expect. Number 3, pick claiming ages on purpose. Find a balance between a bigger check later and how much of a bridge you're comfortable building. And number 4, stress test your plan. Taxes, healthcare, IRMA, inflation, fees, and sequence risk are all going to move these numbers. Adjust your allocations and buffers accordingly. The bottom line, retire now and claim now is a path that works for many, but it is not the only path out there. If you want to retire now and delay claiming, that is absolutely an option. Just make sure you know what your income and your spending is going to look like throughout the course of your retirement so you can build the appropriate buckets to fund the retirement you want. What are your thoughts? When are you planning on retiring and when are you planning on claiming Social Security? I would love to hear. Leave it in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye. Won't those euros? I could go for a euro. I was trying to say zeros. I shed more than anyone I've ever met. Essentially, we have to plan their retirement. I might have been a little far from the microphone. I'm sorry. I'll get closer. Whoa. Tongue-tied like you would not believe. I think I need to move that light a little bit closer. Our gap that is needed to, I will get there. My hair keeps getting stuck in the microphone. I heard it. Okay, let's try again. I have a hangnail that is really bothering me. My battery is like, less than 1%, but we finished. I'm so excited.